Okay, thank you all for coming out to our second Sunday lecture series here at Monmouth Battlefield State Park. I'm Dr. David Martin, the president of the Friends of the Battlefield. Just so for information for the audience here and anybody who has been viewing this, we are taping it for use at Manalapan Township and for our website. We've been talking for years about taping these lectures. This is the second year I've been doing this series. So that people that cannot attend or want to see it again can do so. And hopefully we can get the mechanics together, and I thank the crew here for coming to set this up. The Friends of Monmouth Battlefield is a volunteer group. We sponsor tours of the battlefield first Sunday every month at 1:30. The second Sunday lecture series, this is the second year of it, so this is my 13th lecture in the series. The full schedule of talks is available on our website, www.friendsofmonmouth.org, and in our newsletter we have copies of it with membership applications over at the gift shop. Besides sponsoring the tours, again, first Sunday of the month at 1:30, and the talks, second Sunday at 2. We do occasionally give other tours, like last week we did a tour to Molly Pitcher sites in conjunction with the state's Walk in the Park January 1st program. We had 100 people out for that, which is pretty cool. We do occasionally give special additional tours. With that, we also sponsor the gift shop. We're putting together a reference library right now. Other projects as we get ready for the 250th anniversary of the battle in just 3 years now. And we co-sponsor the annual Battle of Monmouth reenactment, which this year is, I think, the 28th and 29th of June. The exact site will be on the website. So, again, thank you for coming out. Next month, I'll be talking on George Washington, because it's his birthday in February. And I'll give a talk on his sense of humor. Believe it or not, he did have one. In March, because of Women's History Month, I'll do a Molly Pitcher topic. This year it's going to be alternate Molly Pitchers, or fake Molly Pitchers that drive me nuts. But they're out there and they need to be dealt with. Not to be immodest, I wrote a book, 20 years ago now, called Molly Pitcher Source Book, analyzing all the sources on Molly Pitcher, putting them in order and showing how the legend grew. I was able to put together, I actually have a PhD in classical studies from Princeton, putting through my ability to gather and analyze sources. And believe it or not, this is still the only hardback, serious scholarly study on Molly Pitcher. A lot of Molly Pitcher information just gets mindlessly copied from author to author, and we'll do a little bit of how source work has been a problem in dealing with Mr. Hamilton. So let us dive into the talk. My premise is to look at some of the controversial issues of Alexander Hamilton's life, beginning with when was he born. We have his birthday, which is in January, which is why I give this talk in January, but we don't know the year for reasons I'll be explaining, and some other items that I'll talk about in a moment. The prime source, if you want to learn more about him, although it's long, is Ron Chernow's book from 2004. It's called Alexander Hamilton. It is long. I will admit to never having read it, because I have books on tape. And I've listened to it at least 3 times in the car, and every time I listen to it, I pick up more information. A large part of the problem in dealing with Hamilton's life is he didn't live his full life. He didn't get a chance to write his memoirs because he got killed by Aaron Burr in that famous duel in Weehawken that we'll be talking about. He wasn't a big letter writer. Some of the other characters in the Revolution, especially General Knox, even George Washington, wrote a lot of letters home, and those are preserved, and we get their day-to-day impressions on what's going on. Hamilton was not a big letter writer. So we have no primary source information from him. The earliest reliable biography of him was his son John in 1834, which is 30 years after Dad died. So because of the lack of solid or primary, if we may coin the word, source criticism, or sources, it's hard to deal with him, and you end up looking at different modern authors who interpret some better, some not. So some of the books I'll be referring to if you want to do more reading on the topic. A fellow named Michael Newton wrote a study of Alexander Hamilton in 2015, followed up in 2019 by a nice book, Discovering Hamilton, which is like advanced Hamilton studies on all the details, especially having to do with his early life and education. I love reading his footnotes. That's part of the training I got from Princeton is I love the footnotes. I'm also a Gettysburg aficionado. My favorite book on Gettysburg is by a man named Edwin Coddington, and I tell people that's not even my favorite book. My favorite book is his footnotes, to go back to see where he got the information from. There is a recent book on him, well, I call recent, 2017. Lost the speaker. Okay, put that there. Alexander Hamilton's Revolution, His Vital Role as Washington's Chief of Staff by Philip Thomas Tucker. I'm going to be using this as a whipping ploy because Mr. Tucker, who I've never met, and I don't want to disparage him, but he comes up with a thesis, which he tries to support in the book, that Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's Chief of Staff. And as we go through the talk, we'll learn that Washington didn't have a chief of staff. They didn't even have that term or concept at the time of the Revolution. You can't apply modern social structure, military structure, always to an earlier era. Another book that will help me with the staffing, and I'll talk about it, is my friend Arthur Lefkowitz wrote a book called, I didn't bring it with me, George Washington's Indispensable Men, dealing with the people that were on Washington's staff and what they did. So as we get ready to start here, some of you have met my little puppy Molly here. This is Molly Pitcher. She's our mascot and our greeter, and she will eat her treat and then eventually, hopefully, go to sleep after she plays with it and is the entertainment in between topics here. Good girl, Molly. So the topics I'll be focusing on are as follows: his birth date or year, his role at the Battle of Trenton, his role at the Battle of Princeton, when did he meet George Washington, what was his role here at Monmouth, and if we have time at the end to talk a little bit about the famous duel. So again, the general problem is that he died in 1804 in the duel in Weehawken, and again, we'll talk about how that got set up. So he never had a chance to write an autobiography. He was only 47 at the time. He expected to live longer, and the best we have is the bio by his son. And again, he didn't write a lot of letters that are preserved. Point number 3, he was born and grew up in what we would call the boonies, in some obscure islands down in the Caribbean. His mother was French-based. We think we know who his father was. They maybe weren't married at the time, which caused a lot of trouble with Burr and his other political rivals. Brought it up calling him a bastard, which he might have been, because they had different customs down there in the Caribbean. So bottom line, we're lacking essential information on his life, especially his early life. And the farther back you go, the more confusing it gets. I see some additional people have come in. There's some seats over here. You can come around by the cannon if you want, and then come back in, and we'll maybe have a brief commercial pause here while we see some of the numbers. Okay. Problem 1, his birth date. We're generally agreed where he was born, on the island of Nevis, which I can never quite figure out where that was down in the Caribbean, but it's one of the little islands down there. And he was born on the 11th of January. Today's the 12th. Happy, not your birthday day almost, Alexander Hamilton. I guess the best way to deal with the birth problem is to give you a quote from Ron Chernow. Few questions bedevil Hamilton biographers more than the baffling matter of his year of birth. Okay, we know the day, not the year for sure. For a long time, historians accepted 1757 because that was the year used by Hamilton and his family, which would have put him at the ripe old age of 21 here at the battle. Yet several cogent pieces of evidence from his Caribbean period think it might have been 1755. In 1766, Hamilton affixed his signature as a witness to a legal document, which they probably wouldn't have allowed. He was only 9 years old, but if he's doing it at 11, it doesn't seem much better. In 1768, a probate court in St. Croix reported his age as 13. So that even screws up the dating more. What happened was when he applied to get into college at Columbia up in New York City, he fudged his date so he didn't seem as young as he was. So he deliberately obscured his birth date. So the summary is that, and we have to accept in dealing with Hamilton, as we'll look at what he did at Princeton, what he did at Trent, and we know more certain what he did here, is that his birthday day is January 11th, the year we don't know, mid-1750s. The family accepted 1757, but many of his contemporaries didn't. So we'll just have to leave that up in the air. And except as historians, maybe there's some things we can't know or don't know pending revelation of more information. Let me sidebar as we look at the battle here. There's more evidence out there about this battle that we can study. One of which is the dead soldiers are still buried out on the battlefield. I want to get in here with ground penetrating radar to see where they are. And we can find out things from where units fought, where soldiers died. That's information we don't have. A lot of the American soldiers applied for pensions after the war, and their pension records, they had to prove they were here and give witnesses. They give good information on the battle, and those records are scattered all over creation, but we keep turning them up. Not to get too far off in the sidebar, but I was working the gift shop one day and a fellow walked in with information that his great-great-grandfather was in the Essex County Militia and was here at Monmouth. And I said, what? And he showed me the papers, and indeed I did more research, and the Essex County Militia from up in Newark was down here. I didn't figure out why. I didn't even know that before because he had a pension record that showed it. So there's still more information out there to be gleaned. Again, I'm accepting January 11th. The best dates are either 1755 or 1757. Now, when we get to his earlier life, it's interesting that he was really bright. He spoke French because his mother was French, and that will be a great attribute when Washington gets him on his staff, because there's another Frenchman on the staff, General Lafayette. And Lafayette's English were not so good. So Hamilton was used to translate for Lafayette, and they were about the same age, and they were good buddies. So much so that a couple days before the battle, Washington sent Lafayette, who was just in his young 20s also, down to what's called Rising Sun Tavern, down below Hightstown, to scout out where the British were. And Lafayette got so excited he took off without getting all his supplies first. And Hamilton went with him. And then last thing I want is two young 20-year-olds leading 15% of your army off against the enemy they almost got trapped and captured because they're just too aggressive, too inexperienced. But that's what 20 years old are. I know my son's not 42. When the revolution started, he's at school in New York, and he raised a militia company, read some books, and got himself appointed a captain of artillery. And at age like 19, which is pretty amazing. He is really bright. He trained it. The first fight he was on when the British were trying to sail up the Hudson, one of his cannons blew up. And he, being a good, he had lawyer training in him, talked his way out of getting fired, and will stay in command of an artillery company. Now, we don't think of Hamilton as an artillery officer, but that's what he was, and it might have been the easier way to get command. The head officers in the infantry regiments were appointed by the governor. He doesn't know any governor, so he's a captain of a New York artillery company. The first real reference we have to him is when Washington lost New York City, and the army was retreating across New Jersey, and during the passage through New Brunswick on December 1st, 1776, General Washington directed some of the cannons to cover the crossing of the river, even though the British weren't within sight, and An old soldier, quote, noticed a youth, a mere stripling, small, slender, almost delicate in frame. This is Alex. Marching with a cocked hat pulled down over his eyes, apparently lost in thought, with his hand resting on the cannon every now and then, patting it like it were a favorite horse or pet dog. Okay. Batteries only had 2 cannons in them, so I guess you might have, other than calling them, I guess, Cannon A and Cannon B, maybe they had names for them. When he was going through Princeton, a little bit later that month, an unnamed friend wrote, well do I remember the day when Hamilton's company, this is the first actual reference to him with his command. Now, we'll look at this when we look at Trenton. Just because Hamilton's company is marching through Princeton in December of 1776 doesn't mean Hamilton's actually there, but we're going to assume he's with them. It was a model of discipline. Oh, okay, this guy does say he's there. At their head was a boy, Hamilton's now 20, and I wondered at his youth, but what was my surprise when struck with that diminutive figure, he was pointed out to me that it was Hamilton, about which we heard so much. So he has a reputation. So I take that back. This source is exactly saying that, that Hamilton was marching through Princeton with his unit in December 1776. That comes from the biography by his son, and we'll take that as better evidence than some of the others. Now, the battles of Trenton and Princeton, which are of interest to us here in New Jersey, are neat battles. Partly because they kept George Washington in his job. Those of you who have heard me talk about the battle before in other lectures or going on the tours that I did, I usually say that George Washington had a record as a commander, and actually be giving a talk later this year on George Washington as a field commander, of 4 wins, 8 losses, and 1 tie. Okay, of the 4 wins, 2 are the sieges at Boston in 1775 and Yorktown in 1781, and the 2 ties are Trenton and Princeton, or the other 2 wins are Princeton and Trenton, and then the tie is here at Monmouth. But if he had a record of 4-8-1 and was manager of the New York Jets, he would have been fired before the season ended. But a significant aspect of the Battle of Monmouth here is George Washington didn't lose, and he managed to keep his job. And just imagine if he had been lost this battle and got fired, because there was a congressional committee looking to fire him and replace him with nobody other than General Charles Lee, his second in command, who was very controversial here at the battle. He got court-martialed because of his actions, and I'll be talking about General Lee, I think at the June lecture. So, was he at Trenton and or Princeton? So his son John wrote, his company, because of the severity of the weather and its exposure to the brilliant enterprises of the summer, was reduced to a fragment of 25 men. It started out with 96. Okay. This attrition happens largely because of disease. I don't know the exact figures for the Revolutionary era, but in the Civil War, 3 men died of disease for every one who died in battle. And it always strikes me, as in any of these American wars, the healthy ones that survived all the disease, the bad food everywhere, most everywhere they went they had to walk, then lined up and shot at each other. So his battery at the time of Trenton was down to less than 30 men. Now, was he at Trenton? Some of the historians, such as David Hackett Fisher and other historians, say he was there. And at Trenton, a key aspect of the battle, other than Washington managed to get across the river in the first place when there was an ice flow in it, was they put some cannons up at where the Trenton Battle Monument is, and they were able to aim their guns down the 2 main streets of Trenton into the Hessian guards as they tried to form. The question is, was he there or he there with his battery? Now, it's hard to figure out, and the main 2 sources that I rely on is, one, Hamilton to somebody, if not stated, referred to a long and severe bout of illness he had that winter. And it's thought, or one of the other sources mentioned, that he was north of Washington Crossing in Pennsylvania, staying at somebody's house along with General Knox, who wasn't feeling well either. And if he was sick, he's certainly not getting in any boat going across the icy river to fight at Trenton in the snow. And I tend to follow that, although others, especially the modern sources, including Phyllis Thomas Butler here, will be saying that he was there at Trenton. I tend to believe his battery might have been. I think he was sick in bed at the time of Trenton. The other thing is that there were 14 batteries in the Army, at least in November, the month before the Battle of Trenton. And only 9 of them were in the battle. So that means 1/3 of the batteries weren't there. They didn't cross either because they didn't have enough boats or they weren't in shape to do so. So when you work it backwards, there's a 1 chance in 3 his battery wasn't even at the battle. And even if it was, it may have been commanded by a lieutenant rather than him. So we just don't know for sure because he didn't write a report. Now what I love about writing Civil War history is everybody wrote reports. They had to. Okay, like big business. What you have to be aware of in the Civil War reports and in the letters and what reports will be coming up from Revolution battles is when was the report written? Okay, if you were at Gettysburg on July 4th, 1863 and you're writing a report in October, your memory of the events might be a little clouded. Secondly, what axes do you have to grind? Did you or your unit do something not good and you're trying to cover up for it? Okay, so at least you have that information to work with. The single main source for studying this battle, other than walking the battlefield itself, is the court-martial of General Lee. The court-martial of General Lee is cool because it covers the night before the battle and the actions in the battle up until around 1 o'clock. So it covers a little more than half of the battle, not the whole thing. And assorted officers, including Alexander Hamilton, gave evidence at this trial. And again, that's our single best primary source on the battle. And it happened in the month right after the battle. The British went up to Sandy Hook and then up to Staten Island and back into New York. The American Army went up to, after the battle, up to New Brunswick and will end up staring at the British across Staten Island, essentially. And as they moved north for the next month, they met every day, at least every day they had a quorum of officers at the trial, to gather evidence. So that is cool primary evidence, among which was Alexander Hamilton. I think he spoke 3 times at the trial. But they have axes to grind because Hamilton don't like Lee. So you have, yes, it's great to have that primary evidence, but B, you've got to interpret it, when, where, and what grudges do they have. So anyway, going back to the attack at Trenton, there were, again, 28 cannons in the Army in November. 18 of them were at the battle. So there's an odds his unit wasn't even there. And even if it was there, I tend to think he was sick at the time. But I can't prove it. Now, that doesn't mean some letter might pop up or something. But what happens is some of these more modern sources end up quoting each other. And that happens also in my study of Molly Pitcher. And if you come in the March lecture, you'll hear my pet peeve that Molly Pitcher's name was Mary Ludwig. It wasn't Mary Ludwig. Somebody in 1881 wrote an article identifying there was Molly's name for Mary, and her last name was Hayes, so he found a soldier named John Hayes that she was married to, lived down in Germantown, or down in Philadelphia, outside Philadelphia. And worked it all through, and it turned out it doesn't work, because John Hayes wasn't at Monmouth, he wasn't in the artillery, it just doesn't work, it's a misidentification. That got proved in the 1970s. There are still sources today that saying that Molly Pitcher from here was originally Mary Ludwig, married to John Hayes. No, she's married to William Hayes, because we have his enlistment papers. It was from Bristol, Pennsylvania. Our beloved government still has those pay records, and you can track that all through if you keep up with the modern research. So hopefully some kind of report or information may still turn up that we can figure out. Not that it's earth-shaking whether Alexander Hamilton was at Trenton or not. We do know more, as we'll get into a moment, of what he did here at this battle. Now, Battle of Princeton. Was he at Princeton? Did he get better in the next week to join his unit? Evidence seems to be that he is more likely that he was at Princeton. There's an interesting story with him. that when the British were defeated out in the main battlefield and withdrew back into Princeton town at the university, and were literally in Nassau Hall trying to figure out what to do, an American cannon came up and shot at him. And the cannonball supposedly broke into the main meeting room at Nassau Hall and knocked the head off of a portrait of King George. Very appropriate. And then the British surrendered. People have gone so far as to interpret that as Hamilton was pissed at Princeton because they didn't let him in and he had to go to Columbia. I think that's over-interpretation. That's why he's there and shooting cannons balls at Nassau Hall. Best evidence, as I researched deeply into it, is, and this is similar to my research on Molly Pitcher, the decapitating story first appeared in 1841, okay, over 50 years later. So it's anecdotal, or maybe didn't even happen. And further research, and that's shown by Michael Newton, who is the best researcher on Hamilton. Ron Chernow is the most popular source, and that's who the musical Hamilton is largely based on. But Michael Newton, and I have the book here if you want to get the publishing information on it. Best interpretation is his battery was there. I'm willing to accept he was there, but the story of his cannon shooting at King George's picture, which you couldn't even see from outside the building anyway, is apocryphal. But it's a good story. So, again, we just don't know for sure. I would call it more likely that he was at Princeton than at Trenton. Now, next question, or next toss-up, if you want to call it that. When did he meet George Washington? Okay. His son, John, in the 1830s bio, says he met George Washington in 1776, the time when after the cannon blew up. Now, I don't, if you accept that story, maybe George was yelling at him for having his cannon blow up. I don't think that would have been more job for General Knox. But at the Battle of Harlem Heights, Hamilton writes, Hamilton was attracted to the observant eye of General Washington, who on inspection of the works which he was engaged in making, entered into conversation with him and invited him to his tent and was impressed by him. Now, how would the son know that Washington was impressed? Unless he's beefing up the story, or that's what his dad said. I don't know, but it seems like at least Washington would know who he was, but there's only 14 batteries in the Army. I think Washington would know the commander of each of the batteries. So I might be willing to accept that one. Although Newton, whom I like, is the best source, questions that incident at all. And I won't even discuss what Philip Thomas Tucker thinks about it. But at some point, he came to Washington's attention. Now, this gets into talking about what his staff is all about. And I said the best source on that is Arthur Lefkowitz's book on Washington's indispensable men. Washington's staff, he called his family. And this is interesting, that when Lafayette came over, and Lafayette's coming over, and the Congress says, we have enough generals, we don't need you anymore, and Lafayette offers to serve without pay. So they let him become a general, and he comes to join Washington because he had a liking for Washington. Washington had a liking for him. And the reason that's going on is Lafayette had lost his father at a young age. Washington has no children. Okay, so they had probably a father-son type relationship. And when Lafayette came and joined Washington's army and eventually will work his way up to being a division commander, Washington said, welcome to my family. And Lafayette writes home to his wife, who he conveniently had abandoned in France when she was pregnant, that Washington called me a member of his famille. Like, I'm his son. Well, no, Washington meant, welcome to my staff. And that was a language problem. I'm a language teacher by trade, and you got to watch that you have those misinterpretations. Anyway, I'll just throw one in there because I teach Latin all the time. The Romans heard the early Greeks that became Christians talk about all their love fests. So the Romans thought the Christians were sex maniacs. But in Greek, there are several words for love. Yes, eros, sexual love, but agape, love of God. And the Christians were practicing love of God. Rome only has one word for love, amor. So when they heard the Christians were all having love, they thought, of course, it was sexual. But as in the Roman view, those Christians are bad people because the Christians drown babies. Okay, baptism. They're cannibals, Holy Communion, and they have love fests. And that was just a cultural misunderstanding, largely based on linguistics. So anyway, that's enough of that anecdote. Lafayette thought he was part of Washington's family. Okay, and again, there was probably a father-son relationship going on, which profited both sides, the American side and Lafayette personally. So at some point, Hamilton came to Washington's attention. He was bright, he was a lawyer, he could write well. And what happened was during the course of the war, and I don't have the exact numbers from Arthur's book, but 35 or so individuals served on Washington's staff. He had maybe 12 to 14 at a time. What was the job of the staff? Now, there's a core staff, and his core staff is composed of his old friends from Virginia. Remember, Washington has an estate at Mount Vernon. I didn't realize till I was doing some more reading on Arlington, the later Washington Mansion, Washington Family Mansion, that he did all his business through Alexandria, nearby. And his business manager from Virginia, his lawyer from Virginia, his next door neighbor that was helping to run Mount Vernon. So his core staff is friends from Virginia. The extended staff are other acquaintances from early in the war, from like Baltimore, his doctor, and from the Maryland area. Okay, so there's the core staff, the extended staff, and then the, I'll call it volunteer staff, and that's what Hamilton belonged to. These are young guys who could follow orders, could write, and could ride horses. Ooh, okay, why were we riding horses? Because in the Revolution, they didn't use cavalry, the horse students, as much as they could and should have. When they're at a battle, and this will happen here at Monmouth, and you want to know what's going on, you have one of your staff members go find out what's going on and come back and tell you. Okay. Also, most of the generals or officers in the Army will know Hamilton and John Laurens and some of the other members of the staff. The senior staff, the core staff, is maybe a little too old to go riding around in the midst of battle, and we'll see what's going to happen with that. I guess I'll jump you guns on this right now. Anyway, during the course of the battle, they don't have horse dudes, cavalry, he's sending staff out. Okay, General von Steuben, okay, the guy who betrayed the army at Valley Forge, was on Washington's staff as Inspector General. During this battle, he went out early in the morning to what's called Overlook Hill over on Route 9 near the Kia station to see what the British were up to. They spotted him and thought it was General Lafayette because it was a guy in a fancy uniform with all his medals on, which was kind of stupid of von Steuben to do. And they sent some dragoons to try and catch him, and he barely got away. Okay, what are you doing with one of your senior generals out there in exposed position? Hamilton, as I said a couple days before the battle, was with Lafayette down at Rising Sun Tavern, almost got captured. During the course of the battle, he is there with Lee in the morning, seeing what Lee's going on as the eyes and ears of General Washington, comes riding back to tell Washington what's going on, which wasn't good, and that's what got Lee court-martialed. And then he came up at noon where Lee was forming his lines and goes waving his sword saying, "Let's fight to the death right here." And Lee essentially looks at him and said, "Listen to me, you puppy." Not in those words, but you can understand the mood. "I have orders from General Washington. When I complete those orders, I will decide when, where, and if I shall fight." He's overexcited because he's young. Within half an hour, he's still there on what we call Oswald's Knoll up near the hedgerow. His horse got shot, and he fell off and didn't take it too well and leaves the battle. A few years back, we had the Alexander Hamilton Association come and visit the park. And I got to go and show them where Hamilton got his horse shot and he left the battle. Why did he go to battle? Well, his horse got shot. I don't want to fall. I don't like horses anyway. My sister did a lot. We went to Gettysburg, she'd ride the horses. I rode the horse, and the horse turned around and ran back to the stable. I said, that's fine with me. But I don't want to fall off a horse. They're big, they're heavy. Okay. Maybe he was stunned, but why didn't he stay in the battle? Because he was maybe running out of energy, but the reason he really did was that I found a line in the biography by his son that during the mornings riding around with General Lee, he lost his hat. Now, as I would say in Latin class, bigus dealus, okay? But what's going on? If you're riding around Monmouth Battlefield, June 28, 1778, without your hat on, sunburn. I'm sure he's not drinking enough liquids. I think he got sunstroke. And the combination of sunstroke, being tired, and his horse getting shot took him out of the battle. His friend John Lawrence was wounded, another staff member. So the second half of the Battle of Monmouth, the course of the battle is partly decided by the fact that Washington is running out of staff members to go out and tell him what's going on. Because Monmouth is the single longest day's battle of the war. It started at 7 in the morning, it's still going on at 7 at night. Battles usually didn't last too long. The attack at Trenton was under half an hour. I think the actual fighting at Princeton was 20 minutes. Monmouth is going on for 12 hours. And Washington's staff is getting dwindled down, including Hamilton. So, let me jump back then. When did he meet George Washington? We're not really sure. But Washington invites him to be a trial candidate on the staff. Now what's interesting is Aaron Burr. Now the two knew each other. And here at the Battle of Monmouth, Hamilton will be a lieutenant colonel now on Washington's staff. And Aaron Burr, his nemesis and political rival after the war, is a lieutenant colonel of an infantry unit. What's really cool is during the battle, about half an hour after Hamilton's horse went down, Burr's horse got shot. Burr's horse fell on him. And we know that because we have some letters he wrote in the next few days that make no sense whatsoever. Because he was recovering from horse falling on us, I guess, I don't know. It's just ironic that they're both lieutenant colonels here at the battle. Burr is in an infantry unit, Hamilton is on the staff. They both have their horses shot within half an hour of each other, less than a quarter mile apart. And that's just an irony. So it's the danger that any kind of officer runs into, more so, and I tell people when we're on the tours, if you're in the American Army and you want to shoot at the enemy, who are you going to shoot at first? The guys on the horses, because those are the officers or the staff members. And you shoot them, that'll slow the enemy down. Secondly, who do you shoot at amongst the common troops? The guys with the bright red uniforms. Because the lieutenants and the captains and the majors could afford better uniforms. Their cloth was a bright red. The privates had government-issued uniforms, which faded to a funny color of pink. Okay, shoot the officers. Okay, at the Battle of Concord Bridge, our first two volleys took out 60% at least of the British officers. British may have had the best line infantry in the world, but without their officers, they didn't know what to do. Okay. So Hamilton and his fellow staff members riding around the battlefield are targets. And if you're going to shoot at somebody on a horse, the horse is about 4 times bigger than the man. The odds are you're going to hit the horse before the man. Now, John Lawrence got him, unfortunately, he actually got wounded. But Hamilton and Burr both had their horses shot. And it's something to be aware of that after a battle, now there were around 200 casualties on each side in this battle, a few more British, a few less Americans. There may be 100 or 200 dead horses lying around. Because you're using them to pull the cannons, pull your supply wagons, and whatever. And after every battle, the Army, besides reorganizing and getting the officers all into new commands, has to get new horses, has to fix the wagons, and a major thing is to fix the cannons. I'll be talking in the fall about the role of American artillery in the battle, because the wheels on the cannons broke very easily. And after every battle, you had to stop and fix the cannons so you could fight the next battle. So you have to think about what we call logistics in planning what's going on. So anyway, I'm circling back. Somehow Washington heard of Hamilton and put him on a trial. Now what's neat is Aaron Burr had been put up for trial to be on Washington's staff a couple months before. Burr only lasted a couple days and said no thanks, and went to serve on the staff of some other general that he thought he could get along better with. So Washington is picking up bright young officers to have on his staff because, as I said, he could ride a horse. He was trained as a lawyer, but he could write well. Now what's important about this is when Washington gave orders, he didn't write them out, he couldn't type them out, he couldn't text them. He would have his staff officer listen to the order, write down the essence of what was going on, and Washington would sign it. And more so, every order that Washington sent out was kept, a copy was kept in a copybook. And part of the job of the staff officers was to copy the orders, to keep an official copy with General Washington. And we have all those. It's interesting, and I haven't seen a study done on it, on look at Hamilton's writing and see how much of these orders Hamilton actually wrote or copied. But that was one of his jobs. He's a good writer, he's smart, and he will be writing down Washington's orders. The problem is during the battle that the key point may be in Lee's court-martial. And the most interesting part of the court-martial is to read Lee's defense of himself. At the end of all the back and forth, where there's about 35 different people giving evidence. One of my goals, if I get around to it, is to do an edited edition of the Lee court-martial and explain what's going on. At the end, he gave a great defense, and as Abraham Lincoln said, he who has himself as his lawyer has a fool for a client. Don't defend yourself. But it was well written, and the main point was that Washington's orders to Lee the night before the battle were vague. And that was Lee's main defense at his court-martial, is the orders were not exact. Who got called into the trial to testify? Hamilton, who probably wrote the orders. And I think it's twice in the court-martial, Hamilton says, I don't remember what I wrote, and no, I don't have a copy. Why is he saying that? He don't like Lee. And he does not want to give evidence to help Lee's case. But that's an interesting point that's not brought out too much, that I think Hamilton was telling untruths, and we'll just leave it at that at the trial because he wasn't above it. So, Hamilton gets appointed to Washington's staff and will be here at the battle in that capacity. Now, the argument that I have with Mr. Phyllis Thomas Tucker, who tries to prove in this nice shiny book that Hamilton was Washington's chief of staff, Washington doesn't have a chief of staff. I don't know when historically chief of staff started happening, but if anybody, Washington relied most on what I could term the core staff. The people from Virginia, his doctor, his business agent that he was used to dealing with. But the ultimate conclusion that my friend Arthur comes up with is that Washington would use staff members for specific reasons. I mean, one was a doctor. You need a doctor with you, okay? And they, again, one was his business manager that could deal with supplies, the older, the Virginia Corps, and the young guys he used for writing out his orders and running around the battlefield and getting shot at. Hamilton may have been more influential on the staff than some of the others who came and go, like Aaron Burr came and went after a few days. His friend Lawrence was on the staff, and they were good buddies, because his father was the president of Continental Congress. And we have Lawrence's letters to his father back and forth that are insightful. But I just do not buy into Mr. Tucker's conclusion. He may be a nice fellow. Again, I've never read him, and met him, and I know this is being recorded, but I don't think the case is proven because of my understanding of how staffs worked and how George Washington had his staff together. So Hamilton was here at the battle. I'm a teacher, I like to summarize things to make sure you understand it. Some of it, education training, for first graders, you got to repeat it 6 times, and for 12th graders, repeat it 3 times. You're adults, I'll just repeat twice. Hamilton's here. He's a lieutenant colonel. He's on Washington's staff. A couple days before the battle, he's with Lafayette, running around central Jersey, trying to find out where the British were, almost got himself captured. The morning of the battle, he is with General Lee, seeing what's going on, and he reports back to Washington. And then when he comes back to the middle part of the battle, around noon, he was all excited with his sword up in the air, asking General Lee where they're going to fight and die, and then his horse got shot and he's out of the battle. I don't see any of that is Chief of Staff stuff. If he was the Chief of Staff, he would have stayed with Washington every minute of the battle, instead of running all over the place. So we'll let that go now. The rest of the war is pretty clear in that he worked with Washington for another couple of years. I don't have the exact dates here. Until 1781. He got married in the meanwhile to the Schuylers in New York. Important political connection. But what he really wanted to do was to get a field command. Because that's where all the glory was. And that's what Aaron Burr had. And sadly, his friend Lawrence left the staff to take a field command down in South Carolina in the last year of the war and got himself killed in one of the last engagements of the war. And we don't generally remember him because he didn't get to do post-war things. But anyway, he's with George Washington, and at one point, apparently, they were in a headquarters somewhere, and Hamilton was talking with somebody, getting information. Washington comes into the house and says, "I want to see you." And Hamilton kind of just nodded and continued his conversation with the guy who was there. 10 minutes later, he goes up, "You want to see me, General Washington? I asked to see you 10 minutes ago." And Hamilton says, "Sir, if my conduct does not please you, I shall leave." And Washington, "Okay." So they both had tempers. Now, Washington tried to soothe it over, and Hamilton's friends tried to soothe it over, but I think, honestly, that Hamilton got tired of being staff work. He wanted to be in the field. That's where the glory was. So eventually, in 1781, Washington lets him go, and he takes command of a battalion of light infantry that was at the Battle of Yorktown. Now, if you've ever been down to Yorktown, it's a neat battlefield, pretty much preserved. There's a Civil War battlefield that happened on top of it, but you gotta have to look through that. They put up a monument, which is cool, but like here at Monmouth, the battle monument at Yorktown is in the town. Okay, the battle monument for Monmouth is not in the park, it's on Court Street in town. And that has its own separate history, and sometimes we run tours out to it. Our monument here in Monmouth, in Freehold, is as big as the one at Yorktown. It is quite impressive. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I can get you directions for it, or look it up on Wikipedia or somewhere on the internet. It's well worth seeing. It's got a neat sculptural history to it. The sculpture, it's one of his first works, but it's really significant. Some neat scenes of the battle. Was put up in the 1880s. They couldn't raise the money in 1878 to get it done. It took them 10 years of selling cookies and pies in order to raise enough money. Then they had to get a grant from the state to put that monument up. But anyway, I'm wandering here. Down at Yorktown, the significant action was when the French army and Washington's army are there. By the way, we could not have won the war without our friends the French helping us. And what's odd is France is a kingdom and it's Catholic. And what are they doing helping America that's basically Protestant and a democracy? Because neither of them liked England at the time. So the French and the American armies are down there, and as they tightened their noose around the British trenches or lines at Yorktown, there was a couple redoubts or little forts that needed taking, and Hamilton volunteered to lead the attack. And it was dangerous, and he could have got himself killed, but they did succeeded the attack and took that redoubt, and he got his fame in the battlefield that he wanted at the end of the war. That's cool. So I'm not going to talk much about his post-war career because I want to save a few minutes for the duel, and then take questions if you have them. After the war, he's quite famous for being writing the Federalist Papers, without which New York State might not have joined the Union. I think they were the 9th state, the one that made everything happen. But he wrote more than half of the Federalist Papers that you study in American history class, or at least in college. It's a lot to read. It's better to read summaries of them. He will become head of the Army for a little while in the 1790s. He's the first Secretary of the Treasury. And which American bill is his picture on? Ooh. 20's Andrew Jackson, the 10. And from what discussions I've heard, there's not talk of removing him from the 10 like they're looking at removing Andrew Jackson from the 20 in place of somebody more contemporary, but I'm used to him that way, so I hope he stays there. But his theories on Federalist government were very strong, supported George Washington's, and his creation of the Assumption Act after the war. That's how Washington, D.C. got to be where it was. Some of the southern states had paid their war debts, and the North hadn't. So they had to agree on where to put the Capitol, and they put it on some swampland, a part of which apparently was owned by George Washington. But we'll talk about that another day. So he's very famous for his activities after the war. We're lucky he survived the war. Okay, writing the Federalist Papers, Secretary of the Treasury, and getting his picture on the $10 bill. In the course of all this, as a lawyer in New York City, he ran afoul of this fella, Aaron Burr. Now, he and Burr knew of each other at the time of Monmouth. I said they were both lieutenant colonels. They both had their horses wounded here. They weren't buddies. After the war, they were more associates. They would argue different sides of the same court cases in New York. They were lawyer rivals. They were business rivals. They were also political rivals. And Burr is quite a character. He did go to Princeton. He's buried over in Princeton Cemetery. Hamilton didn't, but that was a point of contention before him. We know who Burr's ancestors were. They were not bastards, as Hamilton may have been. They just didn't like each other. And they're going to have political rivals, especially when Hamilton opposes Burr in a couple elections, one of which was for New York governor, because Hamilton's associated with the Schuylers, and the Schuylers don't like Burr either. So what apparently happened, as best I can understand, and this is another episode in his life that we don't and probably won't know. Hamilton was up in upstate New York at some party, just in a bar, campaigning for something, I don't forget what, and said something, obviously inappropriate, not nice, we'll say, about Burr. Like he wasn't fit to, I forget the quote on Washington. Somebody said that he couldn't lead a pack of schoolgirls or something, I don't know what. But anyway, so afterwards, Burr got wind of it and said, "Sir, you insulted me, take it back." And Hamilton says, "I don't remember insulting you." And Burr says, "You insulted me, take it back." And Hamilton says, "I'll take it back if you tell me what you want me to take back." And Burr says, "You insulted me, take it back." They're not communicating. So what happens? A duel. Now, duels to us seem very strange because they don't happen no more. They are common in those days, including the fact that Hamilton's own son had been killed in a duel. Okay. Andrew Jackson was living with his wife Rachel, or with his future wife Rachel. I think she hadn't been fully divorced from her previous husband yet. And somebody insulted her, and relatively so, because she wasn't legally able to marry him yet. And Jackson got in a duel and got shot and carried the bullet till the end of his days. So dueling was common then. Hamilton knew fully well what dueling could cause because his own son had been killed in a duel. That's how gentlemen settled their differences. Now, it might have been better if they did fencing, because it wouldn't be as deadly or you can stop. Now, what might happen with a duel is, since Burr charged him, Hamilton got to pick the weapons. He's going to bring the same pistol that killed his son. Okay? he got to pick the spot. Weehawken, New Jersey, on the bluffs there. I understand there's a little marker there. I haven't been to see it. It's on my bucket list. Why are they doing there's I have trouble with the parkway there. I had enough trouble trying to find the exit for Fort Lee without getting run over. Why are they in Weehawken, New Jersey? Because New York has strong laws against dueling. New Jersey's aren't quite as strong. So he picks a spot, Weehawken, New Jersey, where there's a monument you can go see. He picked the weapons. And what's odd here is Burr right now is Vice President of the United States. And that's another whole controversy on the election of 1800 on how Burr and Jefferson were running together. And in those days, the guy with the most electoral votes would be president, the second most would be vice president. And they tied, because everybody in Jefferson's party voted for both of them. And Burr said, oh, I could be president now. And Hamilton eventually sided with Washington, and that was maybe one of the last straws. So anyway, they're at this duel. And what would often happen, or you could happen at a duel, is you turn, you walk your 10 paces, and then you just fire up in the air. And you shake hands, and go have a beer, go home. Well, what happened was, when Burr turned around, now, Burr picked the sides, and he's looking into the sun for some reason. And when he turns, his pistol goes off. Now, it might have been a hair trigger, or it might have been a shot as a deliberate miss. If it was a deliberate miss, it was a bad shot because it clipped a tree branch right next to Burr's head. So Burr got pissed and went bang and hit Hamilton in the stomach. He died a painful death like 36 hours later. When it got to go to court, and actually New Jersey indicted Burr for murder as a sitting vice president, nobody could give evidence because the way the duel is set up, when the two guys line up to shoot, they're seconds, they have a doctor there, and the witnesses all turn their backs. So that when the shots go off, they can legally testify. I didn't see what was going on. Okay. So Burr runs off down to some friend in Georgia or somewhere, still being vice president. Eventually, he shows up back in Washington as vice president and does not hold any future office. So we don't know at this duel what exactly happened, or because nobody witnessed it. They heard it, but they didn't witness it. And we don't know what Hamilton's intentions were because he died. And he never got to write about it. He did write up his will before the episode. And I don't know about his poor wife because they had like 6 other kids. But we don't know if he planned to deliberately miss or not. So that's the summary of his life. And being a school teacher, I'm at the end of my hour. We'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. Very interesting character. I'm not going to get into the musical. I have not seen the musical yet. It probably twists history enough that, I mean, I just saw Gladiator 2, and it was enjoyable, and the scenes were done, but they twisted history, and don't get me going on what they twisted. I haven't seen it yet. I was waiting for it to come out as a movie. I'm not into rap anyway, but one of these years, before my time comes, maybe I'll watch it. But it has increased interest in Hamilton and interest in the party. So that concludes my hour of talking. I'd be glad to field a few questions if anybody has them, or stay afterwards. And Molly's been sleeping well. She usually does. Now she's waking up. She knows what bed is finishing. And I appreciate you all coming out to the park. Okay, thank you all.